My name is Jin Cho. I'm actually from Microsoft Corporation. Obviously, we're one of the sponsors here, so I'm one of their cloud architect that supports the local market area in the Twin Cities. And my role here at Microsoft is actually get to work with all the Fortune 1000 companies, the larger corporations around Twin Cities, and helping them with business intelligence and cloud technologies. But today, more importantly, I'm going to introduce your speaker today. So I'm going to introduce Tom Nedwek. Tom is a hybrid architect who typically serves in solutions and business architecture roles. These roles have included helping organizations like Ford Motor Company, Walt Disney World, Accenture, Navanat subsidiary, develop process modeling, solution delivery methodology. So here's Tom. Thank you.
Thank you, Jin. Hello, all. Thank you. Welcome to the first Midwest ACC. Welcome to your first after lunch presentation. Since it's after lunch, we're all going to do a little exercise. Everybody raise one hand, please. This is as far as we're going to go because this is IT, no jumping jacks. All right. Now, do me a favor, drop your hands if you have never been in an organization that has attempted an agile transformation. Just never tried it. It's okay. You can drop your hands. Cool. Now, those of you who are left, please drop your hands if you've been in an organization that has tried an agile transformation, but it never really took. Okay. Those of you who remain, please drop your hand if some of your organization has agile concepts, but the organization as a whole just is not agile yet. We got any hands left? I didn't think so. The last group would be those who actually saw an enterprise-wide agile transformation. And as you can see, those are rare. I mean, this is a self-selecting group, and we haven't seen it. So what do we do? You know, what about the rest of us? What about those of us who want to affect change, but it's obviously really, really difficult to do? Well, I'll admit, for a long, long time, I thought the only way to affect organizational change like that was top-down, big, fancy, get your C-level support and push it down. I mean, I'd seen new methodologies roll out at Pillsbury and 3M. Pillsbury, yeah, which tells you how long I've been in IT. I've helped, yeah, it's okay, go ahead and laugh. Everyone else does. So does Mrs. Ned. I've helped Ford Motor Company and Walt Disney World develop new solution delivery methods. But through it all, I thought, how would I, as just some guy, ever have this kind of impact? And then about 4 years ago, I made a discovery that really changed the way I looked at all of this. I found another way to affect organizational change, and it's one that we can use to bring agile concepts to our organizations, to our clients. And I want to share that with you for a couple of reasons. First, my guess is that there are many of you who are in the same boat I was. You want to impact your organization. You want to help your clients. You want to help them do what they do better, but you don't know how within your role. And the good news is you can. The other side is what we heard at the keynote this morning, that agile is here whether you like it or not. And as architects, we need to be players. We can't be on the sidelines. Great, that was a great thing to say, but how the heck do you do it? Well, what I want to talk to you about is 10 concrete ideas that you can all use, even down at the team level, to help bring agile ideas into your organization. Some will work, some won't, but that's okay. Pick up the magic clicker. If you have to leave in 3 minutes, here's the big idea. When you're bringing agility to an organization, it's okay to start small. About 4 years ago, I was at Ford Motor Company with Pegasystems working as a business architect. And one of the things we needed to accomplish was take a small team and insert some agility into it. What we did was take a few concepts at a time and try them out on this very small scale. Some things worked, some things didn't. The things that worked, we kept. Things that didn't work, we jettisoned. It was all low ceremony. We didn't worry about embracing an entire method being academically correct. We didn't worry about following somebody's book or even the speech from some guy at a conference. We just tried stuff, and it made a big difference. Within that part of Ford Motor IT, in about 6 weeks, this team went from the project that nobody wanted to be on. How many of us have been on one of those? To the project that everybody wanted to be on. So you can do it, and it wasn't hard. Sometimes all it took was the team's agreement to try something. But I get pushback sometimes with this idea because it's like, ooh, agility. Agility is a cultural transformation. Well, yeah, it is. If you want to take your whole organization and go from phase gates to agility, that is a big transformation. But as we've seen, it's a rare transformation. We can't just sit back and say, well, this is hard, so we're not going to do it. Small works, and it works for 4 big reasons. One, small efforts have lower risk. If you take small bites and something doesn't work, you throw it out. You didn't spend a lot of time, you didn't spend a lot of money, so you got no risk. That makes people, those of you who can't see, a tiny ball just rolled up to the front. This is like a physics experiment. God, I'm back at the U. Oh, that's his microphone. The bad news is I'm back at the U. The good news is I'm 20 years old again. Yes! Okay. Small batches are also less expensive because you're doing small stuff. You're not rolling out $10 million worth of rational software to your organization and hoping that you get ROI. You're trying little stuff. So if it works, great. If not, you didn't break the bank. Small batches produce faster results because what you're doing is right there. You're not imposing this thing on an entire organization and hoping that you see something sometime later. You're trying an idea and you're asking the team in the afternoon if it worked or not, or after a week, or after a sprint, or after a 3-month iteration. But you see results quickly. Those faster results accelerate learning. Because you're seeing results, you're finding out what works and what doesn't right away. So you can deal with it. You can change. You can pivot, as the first presenter here was talking about. Go ahead and make changes. But all of that is facilitated by the fact that you're changing the organization in small batches. So embrace that idea. Since we're talking about helping IT organizations do what they do better, or helping our clients do what they do better, we need to level set on what they do. And there are lots of answers to this depending on how many books you want to read and how many websites you want to go to. So for the next 40 minutes, here's the answer. IT organizations exist to deliver the right solution. That means the right functionality at the right time, at the right price, for the right consumers, in ways that are maintainable and appropriately reusable. That is what IT does. IT does not exist to manage projects, follow methodologies, produce artifacts, or, and this is always fun to say when I speak at Agile development conferences, IT organizations don't exist to produce working code. That's not what Kent Beck said. All of that has value, but it's not intrinsic value. It has value to the degree that it helps the organization deliver the right solution. And that's the lens we're going to use, and you're going to use, I hope, when you leave here, when you look at, is that particular Agile concept, is that particular idea for changing my organization good or not? If it gets you closer to delivering the right solution, it's probably worth trying out. And if it doesn't, it's probably worth not doing. And by the way, I know we live in the real world. There are things that we all have to do that don't get us any closer to the real solution. Whether it's, federal government, whether it's just the culture of our organization. Don't go crying to your mama because you're on the road in the real world. We are here and we live in the real world, and sometimes you'll do stupid stuff. But for the most part, if you use this lens, your organization is going to get better at what it does, which is delivering the right solution. Now, there are lots of characteristics of Agile organizations, again, depending on whose book you read or whose class you take. We're going to talk about these 6 today, and of these 6, I'm going to give you 10 concrete ideas that may help your organization become more agile. Please, for all of them, if I mention one that you know is not going to help your organization get to the right solution, don't sweat it. Just turn the page and look at the next one. That's why I gave you 10. None of these are going to work for everybody, but a lot of them are going to work for a lot of you. And hopefully they will give you ideas of other things that you can do in your organization. But these characteristics are: 1, agile organizations deliver quality early and often. They deliver valuable software. So if it's not happening early and often, you want to look at ways to make it so. Even as architects, we want to deliver value early and often. Please don't tell someone they have to wait 18 months for your architectural vision, because in 17 months you might not have a job. Agile organizations embrace change enthusiastically. Don't sell this one short. Agile organizations don't tolerate change, they look for it. Change is good. Change means that people are paying attention. Agile organizations choose value over activity. Don't do stuff just to do stuff. That happens a lot. Nip it in the bud. Agile organizations value openness and transparency. When stuff goes well, everybody should know. When stuff goes bad, everybody should know. Because when stuff goes bad, that's your opportunity to improve. So don't hide it. Don't run away from it. Make it really, really evident. Oh, and by the way, I don't know how they're going to do this practically, but if you don't want to scribble notes and they're not planning on sending you the presentation, you've got my email in the first slide. Just email me. I'll send you the deck. I don't want you to spend too much time doing that. Thank you. PDFs will be available, so there you go. You can email me anyway. What the heck? Everybody needs another friend. All right, so we're maintaining transparency and openness. Agile organizations also learn and share knowledge. Agile teams become more effective because everybody on the team shares with everybody else. This is not a climate where your value to the organization is that you know this thing and you're the only one who knows this thing, and God help anyone who tries to know that thing because that's your thing. That's not an Agile thing. And you can encourage your team not to do that. I've got some ideas around that. Finally, Agile organizations attend to technical excellence, which is not to say that other organizations don't care about technical excellence. It's just that Agile organizations make time for it. It is an important part of an Agile team's work. It doesn't just happen when somebody's got time. So those are our 6 characteristics. What I'm going to do now is talk to you about 10 ideas for implementing them. But before I do, I've already talked a lot at you. Questions so far? Thoughts? Are you in the right presentation? Because if you're not and you leave, it's okay. If you thought this was going to be something else. All right. I've been given authority to go forward. As far as delivering value early and often, please provide frequent demos and releases. Show your stuff to your customers, your users, your clients very often. For one thing, I'm skipping ahead. What I have to do is get to releases. If you're working in C# or Java or something like that, you're used to the idea of continuous builds, continuous integration, maybe even continuous deployment. You know what a daily build is. It's kind of part of the culture. If you are working in a predominantly, say, COBOL environment, which is where I came up, so no diss on COBOL people, they don't think about concepts like daily builds. So it's a concept that you've got to help them understand. But the idea of a release here is a chunk of software that is production ready. It's not just built, it's not just kind of tested, it's production ready. So even if you're doing mainframe development, my suggestion is you get your teams thinking about producing releases in relatively short time frames. Maybe as little as 2 to 4 weeks. And there's lots of reasons why. We'll get to those in a minute. Just remember that a release doesn't have to be deployed, but it is clean enough to be. That's a really stringent criterion. And if you let that drop, you've got anarchy. So if you're going to do this, if you're going to talk about releases, make sure a release is ready to be deployed. It is that clean. Why? Well, for one thing, it decreases time you spend going down the wrong path. If you're showing stuff to your users constantly, you don't have to wait 18 months for them to say, oh, did we say that? No, it's not going to work now. They're seeing it every couple of weeks. And it also increases their confidence that you're listening to them. Again, because they're seeing stuff. And they're not just seeing artifacts, which are good. We'll get to that too. I don't think artifacts are evil. But if you're building stuff that they can see, actual working software, then they believe you. You're building that trust. So in order to do this, on whatever platform you're on, break your work into short chunks, 2 to 4 weeks usually. Because then the team can focus, and you never lose the fact that we're here to deliver value. What value are we delivering in these 4 weeks? And you're not going to build a system in 4 weeks. You're probably not going to get through a use case in 4 weeks. But you're going to deliver something. So talk about that. Get your teams thinking that way. At the very least, as you finish those chunks, demonstrate them. If you got something that's ready to go, ready to be deployed when appropriate, show it to your users, and hopefully you're doing that a lot more often. But at the very least, at the end of every chunk, show your work. And team, after every one of those, take a look at yourself and say, all right, how did we do? What's working? What's not? I'm on a project right now where in a very predictable program, we have a tiny bit of, well, it's tiny just in the scope of that program. It's still a lot of work, but what we're doing is very unpredictable. We're off in terra incognita where nobody's entirely sure what's there, but whatever's there has to be moved over here. So our first job is figuring out what the landscape looks like. That does not lend itself very much to the idea of looking at this like an assembly line. Well, tell me up front all the things you need to do, and I'll set up the project plan. Doesn't work that way because we don't know what we have to do. So we're kind of feeling our way through not only what we have to do, but how we're going to do it as a team, because this idea is a little foreign to the organization. And so about once a week, we look at ourselves and say, how are we doing? We looked at the way we were doing requirements docs about a month ago. And one of the BAs said, we're doing all of this stuff, and 2/3 of it's redundant. Why don't we just do this? Darn if he wasn't right. So we're doing this now. But we take time to evaluate what we're doing, and that, I think, is very important for your teams. Get them thinking that they're always looking at themselves and evaluating and getting better. And again, in the scope of what I'm talking about, you don't need the whole organization to look at itself every 2 weeks and get better. All you're suggesting is your team does. And what's that going to cost? Pretty much nothing. And if it doesn't work for some reason, if your team, I don't know, gets all defensive when you do that, well, then don't do it anymore. But you can try it. And as long as you're doing little changes like this, if it works, great. If it doesn't, maybe try number 2. Integrate early and often. Oh, this is a biggie. How many of you have been on projects on whatever platform where they're talking about the plan and they say, oh, and performance testing is scheduled for right after the rest of QA testing, which ends up being 2 weeks before deployment. Anybody ever have that happen? Oh, yeah, I was on a call with that a week ago. It was all I could do to hold my tongue because it wasn't my project. But what happened? You've seen it. What happens when you're 2 weeks before go live and you suddenly realize that everything about this from a business value standpoint necessitates a given level of performance, and what got built doesn't meet it? You got 2 weeks of chaos. No. If you know that some non-functional requirement is key, it's a big architectural risk, test it early and often. You should also be doing an architectural spike to prove it in an early iteration, but that's another talk. At the very least, if it's important, don't wait. Test it early. In fact, test all these integrated pieces all the time. This is getting for example, a mainframe team used to the idea of a daily build. Sure, you're not doing daily builds. Everybody compiles their programs as they go, but you do something like integration testing on a regular basis, maybe daily, maybe every 3 days. But you never go very long without making sure that all the pieces still work. Why? Well, issues with your build, integration issues between two programs use different versions of the CICS-COM area, and they collide. It happens, but when it happens, you want to find it soon. You don't want to wait a week or a month until you realize that you fire off that transaction you're going to get a SOC for. You want to find out soon. A couple of chuckles from those of you who have found SOC 4s. Yeah, that was my life. And this idea that problems with meeting non-functional requirements, you find them out early when you've got time to adjust. Some things refactor real well. Architecture isn't one of them. So if there's a problem with your architecture, and that's often where non-functional requirements aren't met, you want to find that out soon so you can deal with it. So first, as I won't say a leader, as an instigator, as a catalyst in getting this sort of idea onto your team, get them to understand how important the build is. And you may have to have the same talk with the C# group that you have with the Java group that you have with the COBOL group, because a lot of groups don't understand how important this idea of the build is. This is everybody's baby. This is what we're building, and we're all responsible for it. Get to that in a while, too. But you break the build, this is a bad thing, and we got to deal with it. Breaking the build is a stop-the-line condition. You guys know about Toyota, their assembly line. If I'm working on the assembly line, I see something that doesn't look right in the bumpers that are flying by me, I pull a string. It stops the entire assembly line, because Toyota figures, I may not know about 2 months out financial planning, but I sure as heck know about bumpers, and I'm seeing something wrong. So we stop the line until we figure out what's wrong. In the same way, you got your team working along, and you're integrating, let's say, every 3 days. And suddenly, entering a prescription doesn't work. Well, don't waste time pointing fingers, and don't waste time having 2/3 of the team go off and keep working while you've got this core problem. Y'all get together and fix the problem. Because the build's what's important, not your little piece of code. The build is what we're all about. And if you're going to test, I did say that it's a good idea to do your non-functional testing early and often. But please only test the stuff that's important. If performance isn't a key differentiator for the project you're on, go ahead and test it, but don't worry about testing it right away. If security is the make or break problem, that's what you start testing up front. So be discriminate in what you do with your testing. I mean, you've only got so many resources. But please, please, please don't make it all wait until the end, because none of us like being up at 3 in the morning. As far as embracing change enthusiastically, the idea of backlogs, which are most popular in Scrum, but they become very, very common because they're so powerful. Anybody, any organization can use backlogs. It's just a prioritized list of insert your way to illicit requirements here. Maybe it's a list of requirements, maybe it's a list of use cases, a list of user stories. But it's prioritized. And I suggest that you do that for the whole project so you know all the things that need to be done, and do it for whatever chunk you're working with. Iterations, sprints, call them what you will, releases even. Well, release is a little big for this. But these chunks come off that backlog. Why would I do that? For one thing, most importantly, it addresses change by allowing you and allowing your business to take that list of all the stuff that could possibly be done in time and prioritize it. And as priorities change, the list gets shuffled. This will freak out a plan-centric organization, I can tell you. But you can make it work. I know this guy, nobody you know, friend of mine, who was on a project in one such highly organized organization that wants all the requirements, and then thou mayest not think of another requirement, or thou must create a change request. we had a project where the job of the project was pretty much to keep the lights on for one business unit. If they found stuff during the year, and this, by the way, is a really cool way to budget, if they found stuff during the year that they knew needed to be fixed, it wasn't new systems, it wasn't major enhancements, it was just, holy moly, that's not working. They had a bucket of money that they were given by the organization, and the organization said, we trust you with this. Do what you need to do. What's most important to keep your business running. So we had a project team, and we had what was essentially a product owner, a representative of the business, and we had a list of things. Now, in her world, the list of things was a list of projects, but they were very, very small projects. They were essentially use cases. But they were usually problems that they had or a little piece of functionality that they needed. And we'd meet with her once a week and say, well, this is what we're working on, and this is how it's going. What do you think? And sometimes she'd say, great, keep going. Sometimes she'd say, this thing came up, and my senior director is banging on me about this. I need you to work on that now. Okay, you realize that all these other things that are being worked on aren't, we're not going to get anywhere on those. Yeah, and you realize it'll probably take us time to spin up when we get back to them. Yeah, it's okay, but this thing's really important. All right, we have just embraced change. The business's world changed, and so we changed with it. In fact, we could change weekly. We could actually change more than weekly because she wasn't averse to calling us up on Tuesday and saying, hey, guess what? But at least, it never went more than a week that we had a touch point with our business. So here we are in this really structured world, and we're essentially running Scrum. It works. And we were very clear about what we're doing. We even went to IT audit and said, because there were magic names that we could use for this kind of project, but because we're doing that, we're allowed to come to you and tell you what we're going to do as far as like documentation goes. These things we will do because they make sense, and these things we will not do because they only make sense for big projects. And IT audit said, oh, okay. Yippee. We inserted agility with really nothing more than an agreement between the team and the business and IT audit. We can do it. People in this room can do it. I'm telling you. One thing to remember about that project backlog, as it gets groomed, as the business looks at it and says, well, is this still the priority? Because, by the way, when you run into bugs as you're testing, my advice is that bugs go back on the backlog. Because, yeah, you found a bug. That doesn't mean you need to fix it today. If it breaks the bill, that's one thing. But if somebody discovered, oh, Lord, somebody just misspelled user on this screen. Well, all right, that's a bug. It goes on the backlog, and the business says, yeah, you misspelled user. Pfft, buy a dictionary. But that's going way down here, because look at all these other things that don't work. So it even helps you as you discover change. As you might discover things that, I just did exactly what the business told me to do, and it's breaking something down the line. Goes on the backlog. If you tell the business, that lets you enter a policy, but it's going to break general ledger when somebody tries to pay it, they'll probably let you bump it up in priority. But it's their call. And don't forget, priority is much more than ROI. A lot of people like to hide behind ROI because it's often easier to calculate than other things. I'm just saying there's lots of other stuff to consider, like delay cost. Biggie, much bigger idea than we can talk about here, but it's huge. Architectural value is another thing. Some stuff we do actually does have only architectural value, but if we don't do it, the business is going to pay the price 2 years down the road. So the business needs to understand that. It's the business's money. Is that 10 minutes? 20, okay. I need better contacts. Thanks for the heads up. No worries, no worries. All right, number 4 of 10. Produce agile artifacts. So what's an agile artifact? It's barely sufficient for the task. It's just barely good enough. And yes, that wording causes a great deal of consternation because when Scott Ambler wrote it, he wanted more people to come to his blog. So he wrote that, and darned if he didn't get a lot of people to his blog saying, that's unreasonable. Well, it's really not if you think about it. The idea is, I can't quite reach, I need to be about 8 feet taller. Some of you have seen a graph where if you plot effort against value for a given artifact, when you begin, the more effort you spend on an artifact, the better it gets. And you'll get to a point where it suddenly tips, and you can put more effort into it. It doesn't get any better, but it doesn't get any worse. And then it starts dipping off. And the more effort you spend, the less value you have. Seems odd, doesn't it? Why would that be? Anybody? Why? How could you put more effort into an artifact and it actually have less value? Yep. You're taking more to produce something that's essentially the same, but what about the thing that you're producing? What if, what happens when your use case gets to 200 or 300 pages? Nobody reads it. And in fact, if they do, they get confused. So if you're confusing people, you're now spending money to make life worse. So don't. When you produce artifacts, produce the ones that help you get to the right solution. But don't spend time and effort past the point where you get a return for that. And this really applies to the work that we all do as architects. It's not in the organization's best interest for us to go hog wild on beautiful architectures when that last 40% of our effort really didn't give us anything. Stop at that 60% and deliver early and often. Don't get me wrong. Documents and models are not the enemy. I am a huge fan of agile modeling. Artifacts are great. The right artifacts at the right time in the right amount of detail are terrific. They're tools, but they're only tools. Agility is not anarchy. Don't ever let anyone tell you that it is. Number 5, we're into how to maintain openness and transparency. Another great idea, daily stand-ups. And by daily stand-ups, I don't mean everybody gathers and chats. Okay, that's a coffee break. Coffee breaks are good things. They're not daily stand-ups. But I suggest you hold them daily with your teams and talk about specifically what you did yesterday, what you're going to do today, and what's standing in your way. And only that. Because these get really inefficient really fast if you're not disciplined about it. But the two big reasons for doing it is, one, they focus the team on the task at hand. You're constantly reminded about what you're doing. So it's harder to wander. Every day you're spending maybe just a few minutes talking about what you're supposed to be doing. It also builds accountability because you not only talked about what you did yesterday, you're talking about what you're going to do today. There may be people counting on you to do what you say you're going to do today. So you're up there in front of your peers. Believe me, I will tell you, maybe none of you are like this, but for me, nothing motivates me like a stand-up, because darn it, if I've got to look at those guys 3 days in a row and say, yeah, that detailed design document, that's not done yet. Because I was talking to Paul about whether Adrian Peterson's going to be playing against the Bears. You say that to your peers a couple of times, and you don't need any manager inspiring you. So if you have a team that tends to wander, this is a great way to kind of herd those cats. Best way to do it is maintain discipline in the stand-ups, and this takes a while, and it takes a firm hand. But it is only, what did you do yesterday? What are you going to do today? What is standing in your way? Nothing else. Don't let people hijack your stand-up. Or pretty soon they'll stop paying attention to it. Stand-ups are not complaint sessions. Those are coffee breaks. And they're not design sessions. Those are design sessions. Those are both really important, but they're not stand-ups. So don't let your stand-up get hijacked. And the thing about removing roadblocks, here's where the rubber meets the road. Somebody needs to be committed to solving those roadblocks. Now, maybe it's the project manager, maybe it's the tech lead, maybe it's somebody. But it's got to be somebody. Because I tell you, if I come to a stand-up 3 days running and say, I'd love to be doing this, but I need that, and nobody is helping me get that, I'm going to stop talking about it. So go ahead and do stand-ups, but understand that somebody needs to be accountable to address those issues that come up. Alrighty, toward maintaining openness and transparency, make your status and your progress visible. Okay, this is one of those touchy-feely, softy kind of things. Put stuff up on the wall. It sounds crazy if you're not used to doing it, but it really does an effective job of communicating what's happening and motivating the team. You want to do it to clearly define the team's goals. So some of this is for the team itself, and some of it is communicating what the team's doing and the fact that you're making progress. You want to build trust in what's been done. And although it's not the only way to build trust, when anyone from your business partners to executives who are funding your project see things like a burn down chart where whether it's use case points or user stories or number of requirements, whatever you want to use to count things down, whatever metric you want to use, when they see, oh, we had this many and we're tailing them off, we're killing those things off regularly, we're making progress. We're supposed to get to 0 by here, and look, it looks like we're going to make it. Super. Everybody sees that. It also builds anticipation in what's to come because you're proving on a regular basis that you can deliver solutions. You can deliver value to the business. So you've delivered value up till now. Everybody's really happy. They're also saying, if they did it before, they can do it in the future. So now everybody can't wait for your next release, which is cool. It's very easy to do that. One thing, you got this chunk, whether it's an iteration or a sprint or whatever, there is a reason you're doing it. Put it up. Really, just a poster with a 10-word description of what this iteration, what this sprint is about. Because everybody needs to be focused on that. Again, it's really easy to wander, especially in IT. There's all sorts of shiny objects everywhere. If you want to keep your team focused, you may literally have to point to that piece of paper a couple of times a day for a few weeks until people get used to the idea that that is really what we're doing these 2 weeks. That's our focus. Yeah, sure, you're talking about the happy path, but what about what happens when the communication link breaks with that other system? Yeah, you're right. We're going to worry about that next sprint. We're not worried about that now. Right now, sunny day. Think happy. Think unicorns and rainbows. We're not worrying about that because we're worrying about this. And it's concrete, and that makes a difference. And then, like I said, you can do burn down charts if you're kind of a glass half empty person. You can do burn up charts if you're a glass half full person. Either way, you're talking about graphically demonstrating that you're working through the list of things that you need to do. You're working through your project backlog. So paper's your friend there. To learn and share knowledge, this is an idea that you may or may not be able to do by yourself. But this idea of getting a common collaborative workspace for the group, and don't immediately sit back and say, that won't work for me. Let me get to my second slide before you do. But it is a relatively open area where as much of the team as possible can be physically together. I used to think this was a dopey idea because it was always imposed. But if you work with the team on how to make it work best, it becomes very powerful. For one thing, you increase communication. And what you really increase are those accidental conversations. All of a sudden, Aaron puts his head up and says, wait a minute, you're changing what? You can't do that. We'll violate tax law. Oh, didn't realize that. Or, you can't do that because I'm changing that database table. Well, I didn't know you were changing that database table. Well, good, we're having the conversation. That kind of stuff happens a lot more in these collaborative settings than it does around the water cooler because nobody goes to the water cooler anymore. Everybody brings their own water. But I digress. It also increases camaraderie and esprit de corps, especially these days. People are very focused. There's a lot pulling at them. A lot of times they just like to sit at their desks and go heads down and work. But sometimes if you bring people together, then I know that if I ask Bob for something, Bob isn't just a name on a distribution list. He's a real person. And if I'm building some esprit de corps with him, for one thing, I don't want to let him down by messing up what I'm doing. But if I need something, I'm not just asking a bunch of bits. I'm asking a real person for a favor. And that builds stronger teams. But please don't make it an all or nothing situation. For example, let's say you're an organization where everybody's got their cubes and you get a conference room and this is going to be the team area. Please don't let anyone take those people's cubes away as a result. Because all of us benefit from time together. And we all need time by ourselves, especially those of us in the architecture world. Sometimes you just need people to stop walking past your desk so you can focus. So, lots of different ways to do that. Experiment with the team. This is another one of those things where you can be very low ceremony. At Ford, for example, we tried a couple different things and found that everybody got together in the morning. And everybody committed, yeah, we'll be in the room in the morning. And in the afternoon, maybe we'll be in the room, maybe we'll be at our desks. But at least we had something that the team agreed to. And that's important too. Don't impose this on them. Don't tell them what they have to do because it's more convenient for you. Find out what the team does, because then the team owns the decision and they will help each other enforce it. One way, these last 3 points are all about attending to technical excellence. One way to do it is establish collective ownership. This is encouraging everyone on the team to bring any idea to any part of the system. Silos of professional discipline, in italics. Did you hear me referring to architects sometimes? Don't necessarily help with this. How many times have you been on a project where toward the end something looks wrong and you ask them, well, why'd you do that? Well, the architect told me to do it. Or the architect didn't tell me not to do it. But you knew it was going to be wrong. Yeah, but the architect didn't tell me not to do it. That's what you want to get rid of on your teams. If everybody owns the solution, at most that programmer will look up and say, hey, Paul, I think if I do what you just asked me to do, this is going to blow up. What do you think? And Paul says, you're not thinking about that. Or he'll say, oh, you're right. But the team owns it. You want to do this for one thing because you don't want bottlenecks. This is when you talk about leaning out the flow of your team or of an organization. The last thing you want is a queue. So you don't want, there's only one person who can make this change. If this were an hour presentation instead of 50 minutes, I would tell you a little story right now. I'll tell you later. But you don't want to be waiting around for somebody. And even if that somebody's still on your team, maybe they're busy doing something else. You don't want to have to wait for them to, can't change that program. That's Bob's program. No, it's the team's program. Or it's not just about code. That's the team's design. That's the team's test plan. If you're doing it, you're all doing it. I don't want to go crazy on sports analogies, but individual team members don't win or lose. Defense doesn't win with offense losing. It's the team wins or loses. And when you're on a project team, that's true. So encourage that. Doesn't really cost anything. That's an attitude issue. Number 9, refactoring. This is something that some agile teams do just naturally. I was never on a mainframe team that ever refactored. Just nobody thought about it. But it's a great way to keep your technical excellence high. And all it is making small changes without, changes on the inside without changing observable behavior. And it works because you're making improvements in very small steps. And since you're not changing external behavior, you're not breaking anything. So you can do it for a long period of time. And you can do it anytime because you're not changing behavior. When you do this, Have your team share what they did and why. You may find that one person made one method more effective, but it's a pattern you can use throughout. So go ahead and do that. Embrace the idea of an iteration or sprint zero. Even hardcore Scrum teams are now doing analysis-only sprints. Starting out and getting a good idea of where you're going before you go whole hog and start cutting code is often a really good idea, especially if you're in a traditionally budgeting organization and who isn't. Because you get a better idea of what you got to build before you got to ask for money for it. Consulting firms do this a lot, because if you do a good job in your iteration zero, you can estimate pretty well. So go ahead and embrace that. I don't care if somebody's Scrum book says you shouldn't do it. If it helps you get to the right solution, go with God. That's what I say. But don't forget those concepts of agile deliverables. When you're developing stuff in sprint 1 or sprint 0 rather, in your analysis-only sprint, don't make great big architectural things. Make just enough to establish a foundation for everybody else. And while you're doing all of this, you got to keep two things in mind. One, when you're thinking about what you need to do with your team, think a little about the organization. If the organization, for example, is focused next year on responding more quickly to customer demands, think about ideas that let you do that. But also act locally. Don't start this. Please don't go to work tomorrow and start by pointing your fingers at all the other teams and what they should do differently. Look at your own team. Clean your own house. You know that better than anybody. So go for improvements there. Couple of thoughts about, great, now my team's running better. How can I affect a larger organization? Because that was all of our hope to begin with. 3 things to bear in mind that I want to tell you about so you don't get bummed when you run into them. 1, organizations don't like to change. Big surprise. You may only be able to change at the team level, at the department level. Take those victories. Sometimes it's all you're going to get. I'm sorry, I wish I had better news, but it's true. If you take satisfaction in those small wins, you'll be probably a much happier person. Keep the reason for transformation clear. You're not doing this because your old idea stinks and my new idea is cool. You're doing all of this to help the organization deliver the right solution. In fact, you can probably spin it as you're not trying to change that method that already exists. You're just trying to make it better. And agility is often emergent, just like architecture. Sometimes, if you're the first person to do this, you're just plowing the field. Someone else is going to come by spreading fertilizer. My metaphor is collapsing around me, but you know what I'm saying. Then someone else is going to come by and drop the seeds. And you know what? Odds are the person who dropped the seed is the one who's going to get all the accolades. And that could be 5 years from now. Nobody's going to remember that you plowed the field, because without you plowing the field, nothing would have happened. Sorry, there's that real world again. But sometimes you've got to be that person. So don't be afraid if you look at the organization and say, this isn't going to do it. Well, it's not, but it's going to start it. 3 final thoughts. First, talk the talk. Talk about why you think Agile principles are important. Share with people what you're doing and how it's affecting your team. If good things are happening, let other people know. Do lunch and learns. Put it up on your company websites, whatever. Understand that your benefits may be limited. It may turn out that the only thing you improve is your team. Well, your organization now has one team that's going better, so that's a good thing. But organizations like Ford see when teams are more effective. So odds are they're going to see what's happening. Nothing succeeds like success. Above all, begin the journey. Start small, start early. I'll give you this afternoon because we got a dinner to go to. So y'all don't have to start until tomorrow morning. But tomorrow morning, look around. Think about whether any of these 10 ideas will work for you, help your team get to the right solution more effectively. And if they don't, then think of something else. Here's a list of resources. I'll just leave them there. I really suggest those last 2 books. if you're interested in the nuts and bolts of how to make teams more effective this way. I'll gladly talk to you about them afterward or drop me an email. But above all, please don't forget, it's okay to start small. I got to let you go. Thank you very much, folks.